Hello, and welcome to Scrivener for Historians. I'm Zachary Schrag, Professor of History at George Mason University and the author of the Princeton Guide to Historical Research. This is episode 2, where we will talk about a Scrivener feature called the binder, which functions as a living outline of your project. Scrivener gives us lots of options. This screen is showing just one of many combinations of columns you can use, and I've got 3 columns here. In the center, we have the main text of the work. On the right, we have the inspector, which I have currently showing the footnotes. And on the left, we have the key feature of Scrivener called the binder, which, for purposes of writing history, I think is useful to think of as a living outline of your draft. Now, historians use outlines in 2 basic ways. One is to outline first, then write. You can make a list of events and topics to cover, or questions to answer, and then you fill them in one by one. You can imagine Theodore Roosevelt thinking pretty straightforwardly in his book. He's got, for every year of the war, 1 chapter on the ocean, 1 chapter on the lakes, and he knows he has certain events he needs to cover there, so he could write out those topics, and then within them, write out more specific topics that would make up that chapter. So that's the basic way that we outline. First, we write down our topics, and then we fill them in. The second major use of outlines is to write first and outline later, a process called reverse outlining. So let's say you've completed a draft and you're trying to figure out whether the topics are of the right length and the right order, whether they make logical sense together. You could start with that draft and write an outline from it, and that's a good way to see what you have and whether that's the best way to present it. Now, if you were writing on paper, the outline and the draft would be separate documents. So you would have to consult your outline to write, or write it as you're consulting your draft to reverse outline. With Scrivener, the 2 documents are together. Every time that you update something in the outline, you're also, at some level, creating a new draft structure, and every time you add a section to your draft, you're also adding a section to the binder. So you are outlining and writing at exactly the same time, so your outline always matches your draft, and even if there are sections you will need to fill in later. And that outline is always staring at you as you write, so you can remember where you are and where you need to go. The binder also functions as a navigation device where if you're reading along in the source, you can get to any particular section instantly. That's not particularly important for a 5-paragraph essay, but once you get into longer papers like 10,000 words, you might have a source that shows up many times. So for example, here we have a source that Roosevelt cites a lot, argues a lot, which is William James's Naval History. Here he cites it, for example, on 477. But then he might be reading along and realizing that James also mentions the wasp capturing the reindeer. So he needs to jump to that. And indeed, here we have James on 436. And then he might be reading along a little more in James, and then he realizes it has a feature that would best work in his introduction here, and here again he cites James. So he can be reading along in James and hopping to any place in his manuscript with just 1 click. And I think that while Scrivener is great for many kinds of writers, this particular feature is particularly wonderful for historians. We are constantly taking our sources, both primary and secondary. We are cutting them up into little bits and rearranging those pieces into the categories where they work best for us. So to be able to have all of those bins open, where we take a bit of James here, and a bit of James here, and a bit of James here, and redistribute that, is very helpful for the historian as we're going through one source at a time and working that into our own projects. So we will discuss this more in later episodes, but right now that navigation is very helpful. To be fair to the people at Microsoft, Microsoft Word does have a navigation pane that can function in somewhat the same way, but I don't think it's as good as Scrivener's binder. For one thing, to use the navigation pane, you have to actually put in all the headings, usually in style, so this is heading 3, whereas with Scrivener, you have the option of having those headings not appear. Here they're just dashed lines, or in text editing, you can change that and have the headings show up. So the strictness of the blockade, the cruise of the Rogers, and so forth. So it gives you some more flexibility as right there. And as we will discuss in a later episode, it's also possible in Scrivener to move sections within the binder, something that is more difficult in Word. You have to go into a separate outline view. So the takeaway of this is that a good writing tool will teach or reinforce good writing habits. Outlining as you write is a great habit, and Scrivener's emphasis on the binder both teaches and rewards that. And the ability to navigate to any section of a large project encourages you to rearrange information in a way not that it comes to you, but rather that best serves you and your reader. So we will continue looking at the binder and other Scrivener functions in future episodes.